Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Swedish Pavilion here in Glasgow at COP26, and welcome also to the virtual audience to this broadcast, Boosting Sustainable Finance, a Nordic Perspective. And to keep 1.5 alive, we need policies, we need to accelerate green solutions to foreign markets when they are needed and when they can create large impact. And we need finance to enable the green transition and to speed up the acceleration of the green transition. And today, the official theme of the presidency program is finance and how to mobilize private and public finance to enable the green transition and the finance flows for climate mitigation and adaptation. And today, at the Swedish Pavilion, we will discuss what's required to make sustainable investment happen at large scale, and both in the Nordics and also on emerging markets. And with us, we have a panel represented by both public and private stakeholders. We have Veronica Palmgren from Nordea. You work as head of ESG analysis at Nordea, one of the largest banks in the Nordics. We have Aglert, Director and Head of Department Large Corporates at Ikea, the Swedish Export Credit Agency. And we have Johan Henningsson, Head of Sustainability at SEK, the Swedish Export Credit Corporation. And my name is Emma Moderator, and I'm Head of International Sustainable Business at Business Sweden. And I would like to start with you, Veronica. What role can Nordea play, being a Nordic bank, a private Nordic bank?
Thank you, Emma. Dear listeners, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Veronica Palmgren and I represent Nordea Bank. Happy to be here today. So it is quite clear that financial institutions play a vital role in the transition to net zero. Our financing and investing transactions impact across borders, so we can have a much larger impact than only the countries we are operating in. In these challenging times, it is quite clear that no quick fixes will solve the transition to zero carbon. So we need a much more systematic and systemic solution to those challenges. So what we strongly believe is that we need to take a stepwise approach towards those targets. We need to set the targets on long term. We need to have the intermediate targets and the short-term targets, and we need to measure via KPIs and reporting towards those. If we think about Nordea as a bank, we drive change primarily through three dimensions or three ways. One is the cooperation we have with our customers. So we serve them with relevant products, whether it's sustainability-linked loans or green loans, or some other forms of financing, and we offer these customers our expertise and support as partners in this transition. The second way we can operate is via the policies and guidelines and structures we build around our operations to guide the way we finance. And thirdly, obviously, we collaborate actively within the industry with our customers, so across alliances, to achieve a greater impact than only if we were operating on our own. In this context, it's of course also very relevant to stress that we have set very ambitious targets of our own. So we launched our own sustainability strategy early this year, where we have set the ambition to become net zero by 2050, but we also have targets in between, so we strive to decrease the emissions from our financed and lending operations by 50% by 2030. So you could say we are very integral and we are a big player in the Nordic region, so we are very ambitious around climate change and the impact we can make.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. I would like to move over to you, Johan. What role can the export finance system play in the Nordic context then to move the capital into the right direction?
Thank you. So we are going to talk about the Swedish export credit system, and normally we think about sort of financing projects all over the world, which we do a lot of, but we also have a role to sort of change and make the transition for a Swedish export industry to be a reality. So we are active in both those sort of arenas, very important going forward. And it's I think that export credits systems all over the world have sort of a very important role in actually sort of de-risking or sort of approaching a market failure that we often have in developing countries when they want to sort of invest in important infrastructure. And what we see now is that kind of infrastructure is really green types of infrastructure more and more. So we need to move away from fossil fuel infrastructure and towards the green infrastructure and the green energy systems. So what do we do in Sweden? A few years ago we had a seminar which with the headline that environmental politics in Sweden is also export politics. So you need to sort of build up a energy system that is green. You need to have a transport system that is green, and you need to build up IT capacity to actually make green export possible. And then you will attract investments, and you will attract companies that will become export companies in Sweden. So the government has actually taken a transition plan, which is called Fossil Free Sweden, and there are 22 roadmaps to actually make that transition. We have, for instance, green steel. We have talked about that a lot. And we have also a roadmap for green transportation and so on. And there, export credit could have also a very big role. So we are now sort of turning the export credit system a little bit inwards into Sweden and offering a green guarantee for climate-related investments in Sweden. And SEK is providing money for that. So together we are also sort of making possible these types of difficult system infrastructure, very needed investments in Sweden. So that's one thing that we actually could do. 1 year ago, the Swedish export credit system made a roadmap to become aligned with the Paris Agreement. So we have 3 sort of parts in that roadmap, and we will come back to that many times during this panel. The first one is to go away from fossil fuel. So I think we're one of the first export credit agencies actually taking a policy where we do no coal, and we have basically moving away from other fossil fuel as well. We have initiated a climate council to understand how we can actually move away from fossil fuel, because we need a just transition. But we also have this export credit that we turn into Sweden to make the needed investments here, to mobilize sort of capital here in Sweden. So we will come back to that.
Indeed we will. Thank you, Johan. And if we then think about the rest of the world and broadening the perspective outside of Sweden and the Nordics, could you, Marie, please give us some examples of how we can export Swedish knowledge to emerging markets?
Thank you. Yes, I can. First, a short introduction to Ikea, the Swedish export credit system. We are a state authority with a task to promote export and internationalization of Swedish companies. And Ikea has actually been in business since 1933. We have a long history. We currently have business in over 140 countries, and we have a statutory limit of 50 billion euros. And we have plenty of room to do more. And we want to make sure that we support Swedish exporters, Swedish technology to get out there in the world, also to developing markets. Because as you know, and we all know, Swedish companies are really in the forefront when it comes to green technology. We're talking about electrified vehicles, renewables, green steel, etc. But one obstacle is, of course, that these high-tech technology is often very sort of costly to invest. It's not always economically viable at first. So I think here export credits can actually play a crucial role. We can lower the barriers to do such an investment also in emerging markets. And we do that by reducing the cost and covering the risk. And I should just give you an example of this. And this is a country, Angola. It's a very recent example where SEK and Ikea have been very active. And as you know, Angola is the 7th largest country in Africa, with 30 million inhabitants. And it's a country that is dependent on fossil fuel, not the least for the electric distribution. But the country decided to invest in solar energy. And they wanted to build a project, a solar panel project consisting of 7 sites, 370 megawatts. And of course this is extremely important for Angola. First of all, reducing its dependence on fossil fuels, but also meeting the SDGs, particularly SDG number 7, giving electricity to the people. This is a huge problem, a huge project, sorry. It's a huge project and very costly, and it's very difficult to finance such a project in a developed market with private capital. So here Ikea and SEK could play a role and facilitate that. The equipment and the transmission solutions do come from Sweden, and they come from Hitachi Energy. And there are several other sub-suppliers also from Sweden. So Sweden play an important role in these kind of projects. So Ikea and SEK collaborated also with other export credit agencies around the world. Here in this case with South Korean export credit agency where the solar panel come from. We also collaborated with a South African DFI, South African Development Bank. And together we could offer a financing solution that made it possible for an international bank to finance the whole project. And we cover the risk, and we also made it possible for Angola to take an advantage of the Swedish state guarantees, making it possible for them also to get an affordable solution with tenors that were more attractive for them. So I think this is a very good example where export credits can play a crucial role to get this kind of investments also in a developing country. And this project is to be up and running in the year 2022, sorry.
Very exciting. And we're talking now about the opportunities, and that's of course key to really transform. But I would like to ask some questions regarding the challenges to actually enable this transition. And I would like to start with you, Veronica, from a private perspective. What are the key challenges to then boost the sustainable finance?
Thank you, Emma. It's a very good question. I think it's fair to say that the world is very much on a learning path still, so we are very much building up the systems and the understanding. I think everyone could be in agreement on data being one of the biggest challenges. So how do we get and acquire and define what is the data around a net zero transition? What is it that companies should disclose? How is it that companies should calculate and count for them? What are the measures and methods we should use? How do we create something that's uniform so that when we talk about, let's say, the net zero carbon transition, that we do it in the same way and everything is kind of standardized across? And I think this is something something which has come up very much during the COP26 is this private-public or public-private kind of interaction. So we definitely need the public sector to set some standards for what is supposed to be reported and how it's supposed to be measured, potentially verified, so that everyone can gain in on the same way of looking at things. I think that's absolutely crucial. And it's quite evident from this conference that the public sector can't do it alone, the private sector cannot do it alone. This is where we need this true partnership and to solve these kind of challenges around kind of the measurement and the path forward.
Thank you. Johan, do you
Yes, I
agree?
absolutely agree. There's a sort of a huge data problem for all financiers because we are different types.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with that, and the regulation is really progressing here, and I think Marcani might sort of say something today that will be exciting. It's very important that all these net zero alliances coming up, that the financial sector as a whole actually take a step, not being so short term, but being long term. So these targets, I think, are really, really important because you have to start there and then you sort of progress and make plans that are more short term, but you need to start in the long term. So But I would say another thing as well, because very often we talk about we want to make those billions to become trillions, and we need to sort of mix public and private capital. But the ecosystem of the financial industry is quite complex. There are different types of capital. You have the institutional capital, and you have the banks lending out money, and you have the export credit agencies, for instance. We have different roles and different purposes. And the thing is, the big challenge will be to sort of take out different purposes and make them green, or combine them with something green. So you do both. You have an export credit system that both is expanding the export industry and also make it green. And you have a bank that is both sort of lending to the society and make the society green. And the institutional capital, which is obvious, it's the pension capital, should be long-term and should be invested in green projects. But they have a challenge with fiduciary duties that they need to sort of sort out. And this is progressing. But I think the big challenge will be to work together, actually, for financial different capital to work together. And you can come in because you cannot finance a project with loans if you don't have an institutional capital that is thinking the same thing. And that is actually what we see right now in some of the more difficult projects that we have in Sweden, that is really transition projects. We see that you have an institutional capital with a purpose, with a green purpose. And then we can help from an export credit agency, an export credit system perspective with a green purpose. And you have a bank with a green purpose. And then you can sort of solve these difficult financial issues together. So we need to also, the financial market or the financial industry needs to think collaboration as the industry now has started to do.
Indeed. And when you talk about collaboration, are you then talking about collaboration between the investors and the customers, or also between public and private investors and
Yes.
financial institutions?
Yes, I'm talking actually about both. Because if you look at sustainable finance, it consists of three sort of main things. Move away from fossil fuel, and mobilize to green, and then to engage. And that is a really, really important thing to do, to engage in clients, to a bank, and see how that transition path is developing, understand that transition path, and really finance that transition path. Not move away from some industries and just prioritize the green, but to help engage in clients to actually make this transition path. So that is really, really important. But something that we haven't discussed is actually the collaboration between the financial industry. I think we need to do that because it's more complex. I think everybody's thinking about money. It's just money. It's not. It's different sort of actors and different purposes, and we need to cooperate as well.
Thank you.
And I do think we have started that, and we have started within Team Sweden, and now we are taking the next step to also collaborate with SIDA, the Swedish aid organization. So I think, and the government has also given us a clear direction there that here is room for cooperation. And I think I'm also here, of course, as representing the Swedish export credit system, which is one of the best in the world, since we are also a AAA rated country. We should be very proud of that, and we should use it to a much larger extent. And I think I want to also to raise the awareness of export credits in this financing that is so important. We have to collaborate. And when it comes to export credits, it says in the new ICC white paper report that export credits around the world have a yearly turnover of $700 billion US. It's the same level as aid finance. It's incredible. It's a really huge potential here. So we have to take use of that potential. And I think apart from collaborating to a larger extent, we also need to look at the regulations, because we are also, as an export credit agency, regulated by international regulations, and I'm looking at the OECD arrangement. And here we need to have much more flexibility so we can incentivize green investments. We have to be able to offer a more incentivized financing by longer tenors, maybe more bullet payments and more incentives, I think, and that's something we need now.
Right.
Yes, I can just talking about challenges, I mean, I think we are 7 countries within the EU that now together are very ambitious for export credit systems to really transform and become aligned with the Paris Agreement. But there are many more, and we need. That is a big challenge for us to really sort of get together, both from a Nordic perspective, but also between those countries that really want to progress within the EU, and then influence the others and have this discussion. And I think we do some progress actually, because the discussion has changed, and we are really actually now talking within the OECD, who is regulating the whole export credit system. We are now talking about how we can maybe, not decide anything, incentivize actually green projects within the export credit system. That would be a huge step forward, actually, because it's so important to de-risk these types of projects all over the world.
That really leads us into the next question. And Veronica, would you say that we're progressing fast enough?
No, I think if you look historically, we have progressed. But what is evident is that we need to do more. So we are not on our way to 1.5, we are rather on our way to 2.7 or something like that. And the challenge is that we have so little time. We know we have to move faster during the next 10 years in order not to reach the tipping points where we really don't know what will happen. So I think we need to do more. We need to kind of get together on this one now. And I think this is something that is what I've heard several, let's say, prominent speakers say. In this conference, there is this kind of sense of urgency which is evident everywhere, and I think it's bigger now than ever before, because we really are in the same boat on this one. So you could say, no, we're not progressing fast enough, but we know we aren't, and that's the key to the solution, that we know we have to do it. There are no options, but we need to get kind of the thing going.
And what would you say regarding your customers? Do you see that they are progressing fast enough? Are they requesting this as well? Or what trends do you see among your customers?
I think many of the big customers are really aware of climate change. They have very initiated organizations, they have risk management functions, they have opportunities functions, they know the sales. I think the largest are, but I think in earnest, what we want as a bank is really that the customers know the transition plans. They have to be in alignment, and many of the Nordic countries are very ambitious on climate change. So they need to make sure they follow the national pathways. They need to make sure they follow the industry pathways, which might be defined in the various countries in the Nordic region. So I think the largest customers are certainly on the move. I think there's a large segment under the large customers, the medium-sized companies, the small companies. There we really need a kind of a coherent policy framework to make sure everyone gets on the same train. So I think companies are in a little bit different stages of preparedness on this one, but certainly the largest are aware. And so we really want to see transition management, and we want to be there to help the customers finance that, but it needs to be defined with targets and measures, and kind of really the boards and the leadership teams in those companies need to step on this and really define it very carefully and in detail, so everyone knows what's going to happen, and then it's also much easier to finance.
Johan, what would you say? Are we progressing fast enough?
I think we're progressing fast, actually. If it is fast enough, I don't know. But what we see in the financial market right now is that there are popping up a lot of green financial instruments. And you have green loans, you have social loans, and you have sustainability-linked loans. And it's like a very big interest in actually developing this. And we see a lot of actually good interests from corporates to use these types of projects. And then you sort of force companies into a green sort of path. So I think we have come to a stage where the financial industries is interested in the question, and then it could sort of take more speed. I also think that there is when we talk about the export credit system, I think we are really actually moving quite fast in the Nordic regions and so on. But not all countries are doing that. And I mean, Sweden has a maybe easier path to do that. And there are other countries that have not that easy path. But I think there is one actor that we maybe underestimate, and that is the market actually. I don't know when that sort of market kind of tipping point will come, but once the market starts to price in, and that happens when nobody expects it, it's like then you will have automatically a price influence. Obviously, a CO2 emission tax would be lovely because you sort of would make that happen faster. But I think we're not so far away from actually having the market play a role, a more active role in the financial market, a more active role in the transition. We can see that it's very, very difficult to get financing in the fossil fuel industry today. It's almost impossible. They are not investing anymore. They are actually giving the money back to the shareholders. So we see some kind of sort of signs that the market is starting to sort of develop in that direction. I think that could be very, very exciting when that happens.
You seem pretty hopeful. It's encouraging to hear. What about you, Mette? What do you think?
I regularly, every year, we meet with the heads of export and project finance of all international banks. And if I look back a couple of years ago, it was all about discussing doing no harm. We want to make sure that the project that we finance follow the international regulations, etc. Then a couple of weeks ago, I went to Madrid and met on a trade event, a banking event, met with all the heads of export and project finance again. And this time it was a completely different discussion. Now it was about business opportunities. Yeah. Everyone wants to stay relevant. They know they have to do that, and they want to do sustainable projects. And I think they want to team up also with Sweden, the Swedish export system, because they know that we are in the forefront. Because I do believe, and I want to confirm what you are saying here, I think the Swedish export credit system, we have worked very hard to align the system with the Paris 1.5 degree goal. And we have started doing that already. We have taken it down to sub-goals. We started by, as you mentioned, not guaranteeing the financing of transport and exploration of coal. We have done the same when it comes to new extraction projects within oil and gas. We're taking the next step for existing projects in 2022. And then we have also constituted, as the first export credit system in the world, we have constituted a new scientific climate council. Because we know this is a complex material, we want to make sure that we base our decisions on science. And that has been very helpful in our business. And also, as was mentioned here, we have launched a green product as also one of the first export credit institutions. And we have also more stringent requirements when it comes to projects that we guarantee with high greenhouse emissions. We want to make sure that there are no in-lox effects, that there are transition plans, etc. So I think we have done a lot so far, and even though there are more to do, of course.
I think I would like to compliment Marie what you said. I think there is this. Earlier, climate change was very much seen as a risk, but it's a risk not to move. So it's a risk not to capture the opportunities. So we need to look at it for the upside. So I mean, obviously, to get the system moving, what is needed is a transition in the energy system. So we need to phase out coal one way or the other, and we need to invest more in renewables. And the access to clean energy is absolutely instrumental to transition the industries to low carbon. So there is just zillions of opportunities to be captured, and we need to kind of change our mindset to really get there to the opportunity side, because that's the way to kind of make the transition. It's not by risk, it's about capturing the opportunities, making the transition via new investments.
We see also that the private sector and the financial sector are also requesting all these new standards and regulations to be able to report and measure the impact. And until we have all of these policies in place, well, how could you possibly create impact and inspire others to still move the right direction? What would you say, Veronica?
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. We are definitely not there where everyone knows exactly what to disclose, but I think there are a few standards which are quite universally accepted by the time. So you need to disclose and measure your own emissions, all the scopes as far as possible. We do already have standards for disclosure, so TCFDs, they're available and companies can sign up for them, and it creates a framework for how to disclose issues. And so I do believe companies on their own can work quite much. Banks are certainly doing that, and we are ourselves. But to get the systemic change going and not to waste time, it would be better to have much higher degrees of standardization and methods which we agree on that this is the way to do it. It would just speed it up a bit faster. But I think everyone knows this is the case, so I think that kind of creates the promise for us also working towards that. But a lot is being done already now. I think companies sometimes feel they are a bit in isolation on their own, in their own chambers, and we can't have that to make the speedy transition. So we need to collaborate more within industries and across sectors, within countries and across borders.
Collaboration is key, indeed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Collaboration and regulation.
And regulations, indeed. But Ikea and SEK, you're one of the first credit agency, as you export credit agency, you said, that have been also imposing this new regulation that you will no longer finance extraction of fossil fuels and then focus a larger share on green projects. That is really a front-running approach. What reactions have that been in your fellow agencies and collaborators across the world?
If I go back to my meetings with the banks,
yes,
it's quite interesting because 2 years ago, before the pandemic, we had meetings with all the banks, and we were explaining that we will no longer support financing of extraction of coal. And the banks were really surprised, and they were reluctant. The key clients and coal is still very important, etc. And then now, 2 years later, no international bank financed the extraction of coal. Now the discussion is the role of gas. What is the role of natural gas, particularly in developing markets? So the discussion has moved completely.
Right. And now during COP26, what kind of expectations do you have?
Just
yes, please,
add a
yes,
little
yes.
bit to that, because we had this council meeting just talking about the role of the natural gas, and especially in developing countries, as you mentioned. And there is still, I think, we're moving quite fast, I think, towards the green, but we shouldn't sort of forget sort of a just transition, and especially in countries where you don't have the institutional capacity or the capacity at all to actually change into green. So our council actually told us that it's not economically or climate motivated to invest in any new fossil fuel anywhere, actually, because it's cheaper now with fossil-free or green technology. But on the other hand, there's an institutional kind of lock-in in many countries. They don't know that this is cheaper and better. They know it's better climate-wise, but they don't know it's cheaper. So we work together with SIDA in various projects, actually, to raise the institutional capacity to know this, and to sort of strengthen sort of the knowledge of how you can make it possible, actually, in countries where it hasn't been possible before, and it's not even on the map, totally dependent. So this, I think, is a very important sort of angle to it as well. We need to make it just. So we have a window now until we phase out gas as well. So we can finance gas projects in certain circumstances where this institutional capacity is not there, and you're dependent, and we have a lot of other conditions for it. But when it comes to oil, new oil projects and new coal projects, it's zero from now.
But I just also would like to, because I know the time is running out, but I think for everyone it's clear that there's massive need of investment, particularly in developing countries. And here we really have to support. And Sweden has exactly what these countries need. And I think the financing here, we are here to support that. We want to make sure that the Swedish technology gets also to the developing markets. And I think SEK and Ikea particularly can play an important role here. So I really want to emphasize on that. Thank you.
To work together to pioneer the possible.
Absolutely.
Veronica, what would you say? What are your expectations and what is the wished outcome of this COP conference and the negotiations regarding finance?
Thank you. That's a very good question. I think my expectations is really that we will see more commitments coming out. We have seen already commitments from crucial countries like India, for instance. We have seen commitments on the halt and reverse of deforestation, which is really important. So I think many players probably have waited to come out with their commitments to this event, and the more firm commitments we can have from various key stakeholders, where we have the big countries involved, we have all the kind of stakeholders which are crucial, them coming out with firm commitments, as firm as possible, detailing how they will achieve it, the better. So today is the Finance Day, obviously expecting some exciting commitments coming out, and also around this public-private. I really think that that's somewhere where the key is, how to solve that cooperation. So hopefully we get some clarity around that as well. So really, I think everything has been quite positive coming out, but let's see the commitments. As someone well said in a panel, is that it's not what we do here today, it's what we do when we get home and start working on it. That's what's key.
That's definitely key. Johan, what are your expectations?
Well, my hope would be that we have some kind of agreement on a CO2 tax somewhere in the future. I think that would be enough for the market to start to move, actually. So that is my really big hope. I also hope that we will actually mobilize those 100 billions as a signal that the Western world is actually supporting the developing world, because that is such an important signal. And as we said, we can play that role to actually make those billions to become trillions. But I think we need that signal from here to make. I mean, the theme is action and it's climate finance. So I think we actually that is one very important sort of thing, I think.
Okay. Maria, would you like to add to that?
I completely agree on that. Absolutely.
I would like to ask you a last question. Where do you think we are in 3 years? I will start with you.
I hope we are on a firm pathway towards 2030, because we start now. When we get home, we start implementing and laying out those plans if we don't have them. So in 3 years' time, we should be on the targets we set out today. So you need to have your sight on 2030, but you need to set intermittent targets, and you work towards those today. And one possible year is 2023, 2025. This is where I want to be. So I want to see those plans, and then we measure in 3 years' time. So definitely on a pathway towards halving the emissions.
Thank you. Johan, what do you think?
I think
and what are your hopes?
We have done a lot of green energy projects all over the world. I really think so. I also think that both the product market and the financial market has get hold of the green transition. So we have both the pressure coming from the financial market and the banks and everything. So the corporates will have a nightmare with all the regulations and everything they have to report to us. But I also think that the product market is moving. So the consumers are really sort of aware of what they're buying, what type of CO2 they actually are buying, what the price is. And it could become an indirect sort of pricing of CO2. And I do think we have a CO2 kind of tax or price in the world, a global standard for that.
So do I. I believe it as well. But I hope that in 3 years' time that other countries have come as far as we have when it comes to export credit system. We have taken some very bold decisions, and now it's time for other countries to follow. That's extremely important. I also hope that we have the incentives, the right incentives for financing extremely important projects in the developing markets. And I think we will. So I look positively on for the development.
Thank you so much. I think that's an excellent way to finish this panel discussion. Thank you so much, Veronica, Johan, and Marie, for taking part in this discussion. And thank you everyone for tuning in and being here at the Swedish Pavilion at COP26. And we really look forward to follow the negotiations, and we really hope that the message that you've been bringing here today, and we really hope that that's going to accelerate the green transition in the Nordics and on emerging markets, and to really ensure the green transition globally. So thank you very much, and looking forward to hear back from you soon.